Hello everyone. In the Changemakers project, you will experience teamwork across borders. The following slides will present an introduction into the topic of cross-cultural communication, including theoretical concepts of cultures and communication, as well as the challenge of working in intercultural groups. What is cross-cultural communication? When people from different countries and cultures meet, they immediately start interacting and communicating. Cross-cultural communication is therefore about the way people from different cultures communicate when they deal with each other. This can happen in different situations and forms and involves different forms of communication. The spoken language refers to verbal communication and is about the language people speak, but also what they say and how they say it. Non-verbal communication means body language, including mimics and gestures. For example, when someone nods or shakes their head as a replacement for yes or no, but it can also be just a facial expression as a reaction to something. Written language has become more and more important as digital communication has become more widespread. It also focuses on how language is phrased, but lacks subcontexts of spoken language, such as the tone of the voice. The language of etiquette refers to conventions in communication. For example, that people shake hands to greet, at least when there's no global pandemic. Cross-cultural communication is therefore always present when people from different cultures communicate, whether that is face-to-face or located far away from each other. And no matter if they speak, just look at each other, write an email, or just follow rules of politeness. What is culture? Here you see some examples of what culture can be. But can you come up with a more general definition of culture? Please stop my presentation to discuss your own ideas. A common definition of culture relates to the aspect that it is a shared system of meanings, which dictates what we pay attention to, how we act, and what we value. Culture is therefore created and shaped by the people living in and with it, and therefore differs between societies. It determines the way we see and perceive, assess and evaluate the world around us, including ourselves and the actions of others. The culture we grew up in, or what we learn, gives us glasses through which we then see the world. It therefore gives us the ability to understand the rules, values, and customs of the society around us, but it also limits our perspective. By meeting people from other cultures, we can then learn to make our glasses more colorful and gain understanding for other perspectives. Icebergs are a common visual metaphor for phenomena whose visible aspect is smaller than what stands behind it, as most of an iceberg is hidden underwater. What is seen from the outside is therefore much less compared to what's going on underneath. This can be applied to the concept of culture, dividing into the visible and explicit parts of culture on one hand, and the invisible and implicit aspects on the other hand. Can you come up with any examples for these two forms of culture? Please stop my presentation to discuss your ideas. Stereotypes and prejudices are conceptions and beliefs about how people from other cultures and societies behave. Stereotypes determine what we expect or assume how somebody from another culture will act in a situation and thereby impact the way we behave towards them. By drawing assumptions about individual people, we can easily misjudge them. It is therefore very important to be aware of these stereotypes in our mind and how they change our behavior. Although some stereotypes might be true to some extent, people from other cultures are always individuals and should not be judged based on stereotypes. Can you think of some common stereotypes that other cultures have about your country? Please stop my presentation for your discussion. When discussing the topic of cross-cultural communication, it is not enough to only think of how we act in our own culture and how we perceive others, but also to consider the way we communicate. This is on one hand very individual and on the other hand also influenced by our culture. In this regard, we can also differentiate between the style of communication and conversation. Conversations can differ based on pacing, volume, level of participation, turn-taking, overlapping, and the frequency of topic changes. This depends, of course, on the situation and context of the conversation. Considering, for example, a group discussion among friends and family, a personal talk with a very close friend, or work-related meeting. However, the mainstream conversation style is also part of our culture. Do we, for example, think it is impolite when someone interrupts us, or do we wait for everyone to express their opinion on a topic before we change to another one? Different styles of conversations are influenced by how the different members of the conversation communicate. This is also very individual, but also shaped by the culture we grew up in. Here you can see different ways of communication. What do you think? What kind of communication styles are good to have in a cross-cultural teamwork? Please discuss and stop my presentation for that. Communication is not always easy and efficient, as some barriers can occur to it. First, physical barriers. These are such things as inadequate equipment, such as outdated computers, phones with poor signals, background noise, poor lighting, temperatures that are too high or too cold, or tangible items that may interfere with communication efforts. Second, attitudes. Sometimes strong emotions like anger or sadness can impact your objectivity. Being extremely nervous, having a personal agenda, or asserting a need to win the argument can make communication less effective. Such interfering emotions are also known as emotional noise. 3. Language. This may seem as a minor obstacle, but even people who speak the same native language can have difficulty understanding each other if they're from different generations or different regions of the same country. Slang, professional jargon, or regional colloquialisms can hurt communicators with even the best intentions. 4. Physiological barriers. Bad health, poor eyesight, hearing difficulties, and pain are physiological obstacles to effective communication. 5. Problems with structure design. Companies or institutions can have unclear organizational structures, making communication difficult. Bad information systems, lack of supervision, and insufficient employee training can also cause faulty communication. 6. Cultural noise. People sometimes make assumptions about others based on their cultural background and associated stereotypes, as we have discussed before. 7. Lack of common experience. It is a great idea to use examples or stories to explain or enhance a point. However, if others cannot relate to these examples because they do not have the same knowledge or shared experiences, then this tool will be ineffective. Ambiguity or overuse of abstractions. Using too many generalizations, proverbs, or sayings can lead to a lack of clarity, which in turn leads to misinterpretation. 9. Information overload. It takes time to process large quantities of information. Too many details can overwhelm and distract the audience from important topics. 10. Jumping to conclusions. Making assumptions before listening to all the facts can be problematic in the least and catastrophic at worst. We would like to show you a video about barriers to communication, but as it is a few years old, it might be good to introduce you to people who will appear there. George W. Bush was the former President of the United States, and Condoleezza Rice was the Secretary of State and the Vice President at Bush time. Hu was the former leader of China. Yasser Arafat was the former chairman of Palestine, and Kofi Annan was the former Secretary General of the United Nations. Please stop my presentation and click on the link to watch the video. The consequences of cross-cultural miscommunication are misunderstandings leading to negative emotions such as feeling confused, embarrassed, angry, hurt, uncomfortable, unappreciated, rejected, etc. If we think back to the iceberg model of culture, cross-cultural miscommunication can be seen as a crash of the iceberg parts which are located underwater. The implicit aspect of different cultures clash, which means the values, conceptions, and thought patterns lead to differences in interpretation of the same situation. So cross-cultural miscommunication happens not because we might have a different style of clothing, but rather because we think and interpret things differently. Please stop my presentation again to watch that video about cross-cultural communication and miscommunication. Now it's your turn again. Please stop the presentation again and watch the videos of the telephone charade game that you have played before as an inspiration for when communication goes wrong. Why exactly does cross-cultural miscommunication happen, and how can we prevent it? Form groups of 3 to 5 people and discuss these questions. You can write down your answers and ideas to these questions together with examples and gather them together in the whole class afterwards. Thank you very much for listening and have an interesting group discussion.